अस्सलाम ख़वातीन और हज़रात, वेलकम बैक टू अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ थॉट बिहाइंड थिंग्स। आज हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं एक बहुत ही ख़ास मेहमान, एक ऐसे मेहमान जो कि पिछले 1.5 सीज़न से आप लोगों में से बहुत सारे लोग रिक्वेस्ट भी कर रहे थे और मैंने कहा था कि मैं उनको बुलाऊंगा। एंड एज टाइम एज इट हैपन्स हमने देखा कि आजकल के हालात के अंदर इकोनॉमिक्स नाउ इज़ एट द फोर फ्रंट ऑफ ऑल आवर कॉन्वर्जेशंस, जिसकी वजह से आई थिंक ये कॉन्वर्जेशन बहुत ज़्यादा और भी ज़्यादा पर्टिनेंट है। मैं आजकल वैसे भी जनरली तमाम गेस्ट से वन वे और द अदर, इवन इफ देयर इन अदर इंडस्ट्रीज, आई डू ट्राई टू टॉक अबाउट इकोनॉमिक्स। इनकी तो खैर कोर फील्ड ही इकोनॉमिक्स है। टुडे वी हैव विद अस डॉक्टर असद जमान, who is the director of Uloom Umran Al-Nafi online education platform. But इनके background के अंदर वो we're gonna get into that once you find out कि इन्होंने क्या क्या कुछ किया हुआ। It's a remarkable profile. He's a PhD of economics from Stanford University and also a PhD in statistics.
And masters in statistics.
And masters in statistics from Stanford University. He did his bachelor's in mathematics from MIT. And then उसके बाद फिर करियर इनका बहुत extensive रहा है. He's taught in for 12 years at Ivy League schools, amongst many other things. We're going to talk about that as well. Sir, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm glad. मैं थोड़ा सा conversation start करूँगा, just trying to understand कि आप पैदा कहाँ पर हुए थे और early life आपने कहाँ पे गुजारी?
कराची में पैदा हुआ, वहीं पला बड़ा कि बचपन में अब्बा जो हैं वो उनको हवाई ईस्ट वेस्ट सेंटर से एक ऑफ़र मिला, तो हम लोग ने 1 साल हवाई में गुजारा बचपन में, और फिर सूडान में एक्सपर्ट एडवाइज़र टू द गवर्नमेंट थे रूरल डेवलपमेंट पे, तो 1-2 साल वहाँ भी गुजारा, मगर बेसिकली कराची ही में हम पले बड़े।
और पढ़ाई कहाँ पे?
पढ़ाई हमने कराची में तो मामूली स्कूल्स में, उसके बाद फिर कराची अमेरिकन स्कूल में अब्बा ने भेजा, क्योंकि हवाई जाने से अब्बा बहुत इम्प्रेस हुए थे अमेरिकन सिस्टम ऑफ एजुकेशन से।
अच्छा।
तो ही वाज प्रिपेयरिंग अस कि हम लोग यहाँ से सीधे अमेरिका जाएं। तो
हाउ वाज दैट एक्सपीरियंस, कराची अमेरिकन स्कूल? एंड दिस वाज 60s 70s?
it was 1971 I graduated from KAS.
एंड टू एंड आपने अपना हाई स्कूल सारा वहीं से किया?
हाँ, 3 साल मैंने वहाँ किया। उससे पहले तो बिफोर हाई स्कूल, हाँ, आई वॉज इन पाकिस्तानी लोकल स्कूल्स, मगर
राइट
हाई स्कूल में मैंने।
हाउ वाज दैट? हाउ वाज द अमेरिकन स्कूल एट द टाइम?
अमेरिकन स्कूल के यानी इट वाज डिसेंट, यानी इट वाज नॉट, यानी एज फार एज यू गो फॉर एजुकेशन, तो जो मटेरियल कवर्ड होता है वो काफ़ी मिडलिंग होता है, ज़्यादा एडवांस नहीं होता है। हमारे मैट्रिक वाले ज़्यादा मटेरियल कवर करते हैं, मगर दे कवर इट इन डेप्थ एंड detail and they try to for comprehension, so it's good actually in that sense.
Interesting. And after high school, what did you do?
After high school I actually I got out, I was at MIT at age of 16.
Achha.
And
so how did that happen? I mean, it's 1971, right? It's a very different time. How did you decide कि जी मुझे MIT जाना है, मुझे क्या करना है? What was that?
This was all have to do a lot with my father's educational philosophy. He thought कि ये जो education है, it's just paper chase. It has no meaning. So one should get, but you need those papers for life. तो इसलिए he prepared us कि आप लोग जल्द अज जल्द यानी finish this, that you can start living.
Right.
Then he really, and he pushed us, he made us skip grades and so on, and so I was ready at 16, and then following the same philosophy I graduated from MIT in 3 years in mathematics. In the first year I took a double load 2 years worth, क्योंकि वो पास फेल होता था। तो उसके बाद उसके साल के बाद जो है वो MIT वालों ने बंद कर दिया ये ऑप्शन। So I think I may have been the last one to get through.
Interesting. So you graduated in 74 from MIT?
In 74, exactly. Then I went to Stanford for my PhD.
Right.
And also I finished that in 3 years.
So that was a master's plus PhD?
Exactly.
Effectively. So by 77 you were done with your PhD?
Yes.
At the age of
22.
My God. Wow. Again, so how was MIT कैसा था? मतलब 1970s के अंदर पाकिस्तान छोड़ के आप जा रहे हैं और हॉस्टल में रह रहे हैं, आई एम अज्यूमिंग कोई फैमिली मेंबर तो नहीं होगा, और वहाँ पे तो पाकिस्तानीज भी आई बिलीव इतने होंगे नहीं।
पाकिस्तानी थोड़े से थे, बस स्मॉल ग्रुप, आहिस्ता आहिस्ता वो पाकिस्तानी स्टिक टुगेदर।
राइट।
मगर एट दैट टाइम आई वाज इन नो मूड फॉर, आई वाज एक्चुअली वेरी इंटरेस्टेड इन बिकमिंग अमेरिकन, तो आई डिडंट रियली
care much for interacting with Pakistanis.
Exactly. So I was trying to assimilate.
Interesting.
I was very young, 16. I was very immature. So, actually, recently I gave a talk on my experiences at MIT viewed at 65 क्योंकि I have changed a lot in terms of my perception. उस वक्त तो I was really नशे में था उसके अमेरिकन तालीम के. It was really an amazing new world opened up and
right.
It was यानी what I was teaching was really what I was taught was totally amazing. Agar much later I realized that what I really needed as a 16-year-old was social skills, learning how to relate to people, and I was already an introvert. और अमेरिका में यानी MIT में जो पहुँचते हैं वो सब के सब nerds होते हैं एक तरह से, तो they are poor squishers. Instead of helping me to become more normal, actually MIT encouraged me in the opposite direction to become more of an introvert, more of specialized and more sort of withdraw in my hole and learn more specialized skill. And at that time it made me happy that I can do technical things which nobody else can. But later on I realized this was a big deficiency. I was unable to relate to people. It took me decades to overcome this.
Really?
And it was a big gap in my whole life. It was so I think that this is true everywhere actually. Magar at MIT much more than others, that what young people need is to learn how to be human being. And universities are teaching us how to become human resources. So
interesting.
Human resources are not, and it's not useful for them to have relationships to other people because they can't work from dawn to evening and enjoy it. Because
right. And it's interesting, right? Because in the age of AI now, more and more we need human beings than human resources.
Absolutely.
Human resources can't be replaced, human beings can't be.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Absolutely. How you put it. And so 3 years of MIT, then you go to Stanford. What was that experience like?
Stanford and MIT were very different. MIT Boston mein tha. It was a very hot center. Students bhare hue the, lots of activities. Stanford was very laid back, very California. It was very difficult. I was basically, there was no social life, so I was just devoted to my studies, so that makes uska apna ek charm tha. It had its own bicycles and hills and
California of that time and California of today, I'm sure it's just a huge difference considering कि California के अंदर तो एक पूरी नई दुनिया आबाद हुई ना post tech revolution. So
वो Silicon Valley वगैरह जाने के बाद वहाँ दुनिया बदल गई है. मगर
क्या difference आया आपके टाइम में और अब में?
Well, आजकल का ज़माने की living मैंने देखी नहीं है. उस ज़माने में तो I think it was.
Was it also as progressive? आजकल तो California is like super postmodern and वो सारा तो उस टाइम कैसे था?
At that time also California was always experimenting in different lifestyles, and I was participated in some of those experiments. Zen Buddhism के बारे में सीखा, कुछ encounter groups किए. It was quite amazing.
Interesting. And then 77. You graduate from Stanford?
Yes.
Right? And आपका research area क्या था उस वक्त economics का?
Econometrics मैंने किया था.
अच्छा.
That's statistics combined with economics.
And was there any particular research area that you focused on?
It was theoretical, abstract. Will not mean much to the audience.
Interesting. So right after graduation, did you work in the US?
एक साल मैंने एक पोस्ट डॉक्टरल किया बेल्जियम में, यूनिवर्सिटी कैथोलिक दे लुएं. उसके बाद आई केम बैक टू यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ पेंसिल्वेनिया, इकोनॉमिक्स डिपार्टमेंट, which was one of the top 10 departments. And Lawrence Klein was one of my colleagues, and he asked me to join the econometrics group. वहाँ पे उसकी मॉडलिंग की बहुत strong hold थी. But I was more theoretical. वहाँ graduate courses होते थे econometrics में, तो there were 2 courses. तो Larry Klein taught the first one and I taught the second course. So students were very good there, and I had the chance to teach some of the best. So my students actually at this time are all over the world and situated in very good positions.
Acha. And considering the fact that you were inherently an introvert and you did end up doing a job which is very interactive, like teaching is not an easy job, right? Especially अगर आप introvert हैं तो आपको connect करना है लोगों के students के साथ में करना है. So how did that?
You see, there's 2 types of teaching. There's one teaching from human to human, and there's a technical set of skills and you have to convey them. So students actually liked me because I was good at explaining complicated things. Magar I had no sympathy for, or no...
You weren't
personal,
one of the friendly...
I was not their friend. I was not, they didn't come to me for personal advice. And
Right. कितना अर्सा आपने पढ़ाया वहाँ पर?
पेंसिल्वेनिया में मैं 6 साल पढ़ाया. उसके बाद फिर I moved to Columbia University, that's in New York. And I also taught at Johns Hopkins and Caltech.
कितना अर्सा टोटल आपने पढ़ाया है?
तकरीबन 15 साल होगा. I think I was out in 78 and then I left the USA in 1993. So
15 years, roughly.
15 years. Right.
And meanwhile you got married, had kids,
exactly,
everything. So the lifestyle was being created there. Why did you decide to leave? Considering कि आप तो tenure की तरफ होंगे या हो चुके होंगे और
बिल्कुल.
You know एक मतलब it doesn't make a lot of sense कि एक career set है और culturally भी एक system set है, considering the fact that you know US and Pakistan are fundamentally different. Kids are now growing up and so वो भी एक concern होता है.
There were two main considerations. One of them was gradually the realization that I am just a glorified governess. I am very highly paid to teach children of an alien civilization. And I do a good job and they give me a good salary and I'm treated with honor and respect and everything. But the job I'm doing is not intrinsically meaningful. और जब मैं पाकिस्तान आया था I really did feel कि ये मेरे बच्चे हैं, मैं उनको पढ़ा रहा हूँ. If they achieve, I feel happy. If they are fail, then that hurts me. And this was not, I didn't identify with the children over there in that way. तो एक तो ये factor था. मगर दूसरा factor ये था कि मेरे बच्चे बड़े हो रहे थे. They were getting into first and second grades. And I did the calculations कि यहाँ इनको अपनी तहज़ीब और माशरत पे कायम रखना है. तो I have to do homeschooling or fairly intensive efforts to make sure that they don't get assimilated culturally into the USA, which I think 80-90% of the children who are growing up there do. And I've seen there are other examples. There are people who work hard and manage to prevent their children from assimilating, but the amount of work required for that was more than I could manage. So I decided that I should shift.
And so what changed? You mentioned earlier that, you know, when I went there as a 16-year-old, all I wanted to do was assimilate, right? And
exactly.
Maybe two and a half decades later, you know, now suddenly you don't want to assimilate. So what shifted? And this was also the time जब एक sort of growing realization हो रही थी, sort of pan-Islamic movements चल रही थी, East and West का एक sort of जो convergence के बाद एक divorce होती हुई नजर आ रही थी. So what was your thought process there?
That's a very good question. I basically पहले तो I just adopted the goals that my fellow students had. We were all young and we said कि अच्छा, the goal of life is to pursue pleasure and social restrictions की कोई पाबंदी नहीं है. You do what you only live once and just go for it, seize the moment, and all of those philosophies that there are no constraints in the path of pursuit of pleasure. So after a while doing this, I realized that this had not brought me pleasure and it had made me intensely unhappy, because I realized much later, now I can philosophize about it, all I knew at that time was that experiencing it. Okay, if you are intensely selfish, which is what you are taught to be as an individual, you pursue your desires regardless of whether it hurts others or helps others. It's my job. You are looking out for number one is my... So the main source of happiness for human beings is loving and being loved, social relationships. And this involves necessarily sacrificing for others, not say I do my thing and you do your thing. That means that we are not... So this, by becoming strictly individualistic and selfish and pleasure-seeking, I had cut myself off from the central source of pleasure for mankind, which is social relationships.
And this is very interesting because this is a major difference between East and West, right? West is inherently individualistic, yes. And they vehemently defend their concept of कि जी बस एक apartment, nuclear families and apartments and just doing their own thing and everybody just don't look at each other.
Yeah.
And East is all about sort of the familial bond and the social structure.
Yes, having sacrifice. This lifestyle doesn't work, so let me look for another one. So I looked all over, and actually at that time I was in California, so it was very easy to. There were many different philosophies of life which were on offer. के Zen Buddhism था और other movements for self-fulfillment and authenticity, and so I experimented with everything, and I also एक कुरान भी मैंने पढ़ा के देखते हैं कि इसमें कोई रहनुमाई है कि नहीं. तो उसमें I came across this dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam ki worship the stars and the sun, and then he said कि नहीं, these cannot be my God because they are transient. तो फिर then इन्होंने एक दुआ मांगी कि लम यहदनी रब्बी लअकुनन्ना मिनद्दालीन, के oh my Lord, unless you guide me, I will surely go astray. तो मैंने कहा this is perfect कि somebody who doesn't know whether or not God exists can say oh my God, if you exist, then you better guide me because I can't do it on my own. So I can't find my way. So I thought this was perfect. And I actually thought of it as an insurance policy. I didn't really think that there was a God. But I said कि अच्छा अगर मैं
It's a mathematical equation, right? कि if there is no God, then वैसे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ा. But if there is a God, then
also suppose that by I'm hauled up on the day of judgment and Allah Ta'ala says कि तुम क्या कर रहे थे, तो मैं कहूँगा या अल्लाह मैंने तो दुआ मांगी आपने नहीं गाइड किया, तो मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ.
Right, very interesting. अगर आपने पैसिव इनकम के बारे में परेशान है, खासकर आजकल की इकोनॉमी में जहाँ पर ऑलरेडी कैश कंटिन्यूअसली बर्न हो रहा है और इन्फ्लेशन हमें मार रही है, तो आई एम प्राउड टू अनाउंस दैट दिस वीडियो इज इन पार्टनरशिप विद सरमाया फाइनेंशियल्स. दे ऑफरिंग 2 very cool trainings. कैपिटल मार्केट फंडामेंटल्स, जिसमें आप स्टॉक्स और म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट करना सीखेंगे और अंडरस्टैंड करेंगे कि आखिर एक कंपनी के अंदर क्या ऐसे फंडामेंटल्स होते हैं जिनको आपने देखना होता है टू फिगर आउट कि वो एक अच्छी कंपनी है टू इन्वेस्ट इन. और दूसरी ट्रेनिंग है टेक्निकल एनालिसिस मास्टर क्लास, जिसमें आप सीखेंगे कि किस तरीके से हम डिफरेंट ट्रेडेबल एसेट्स लाइक कमोडिटीज, फॉरेक्स, स्टॉक्स, क्रिप्टो के अंदर थोड़े से पैसे लगाकर बहुत ज़्यादा पैसे बना सकते हैं. पर्सनली ये ट्रेनिंग मैंने भी ली है एंड इट्स एब्सोल्युटली फिनोमिनल. द लिंक टू द ट्रेनिंग्स आर इन द डिस्क्रिप्शन बिलो. चेक देम आउट एंड बिकम फाइनेंशियली हेल्दी. एंड नाउ बैक टू द पॉडकास्ट. Very interesting the way that you put it. So it was basically a reconnection with your sort of religion / culture / roots. And so then you come back, right? 1990.
Well, then I started asking, then there was a real clear-cut option between me. या तो either I renounce the world, or क्योंकि going back would mean, I was on a very good track with Ivy League schools and tenure track and sort of the standard academic high-end track. And I was getting everything that that track entails. And I realized that ठीक है, this is not something that's I'm like very much. I'm willing. ठीक है, it had its charm, but I'm willing to sacrifice it for the sake of my children. Basically, this is a choice which you experience when you move to the West. You are basically choosing comfort of your lifestyle, and there is a lot of comfort and luxury, but sacrificing the akhirat of your children, and this is really a very bad trade-off. So I said कि ठीक है, I don't choose to make this trade-off. I'll गुमनाम होके रहूँगा and I will come back. It doesn't matter. I'll be making enough, and that's enough, good enough for me. इसमें तबलीग का भी बहुत असर था कि sometime during my period there वो तबलीग वाले आए and I spent some time with them, and I realized the goal of life is not to earn money and to become famous and to achieve goals, but the goal of life is to achieve success of the day of judgment. So all of these attractions of the world are just illusions, short-term and short-lived and meaningless. And I had experienced this also, so the emptiness of worldly success. So it didn't have the same charm that it did earlier. It was easier to leave. मगर दिल में फिर भी उसकी ख्वाहिश तो रहती है, इसलिए उसका थोड़ा सा तो तकलीफ हुई, मगर ज़्यादा नहीं.
Interesting. So 93 you come back to Pakistan.
93 में I made dua कि Allah Ta'ala find me a way. तो one of my students from Turkey at Johns Hopkins, he went back to his university, जो कि एक बिल्कुल नई यूनिवर्सिटी वहाँ बना रहा था बिलकेंट में. बिलकेंट यूनिवर्सिटी was being built by दो रामाजी, who was sort of like our LUMS, but except that it's a university level and much better funded and full university. So he had built this modern university in Turkey, the first one. And so he sent me a letter totally out of the blue without my application. Mere desk pe ke, why don't you come and teach here? And he had a good offer, etc. So I said, "Acha, maine dua mangi thi, uski jawab aa gaya." So I just.
And Turkey is a great sort of wean-off period, right? It's a nice mix of West and East.
That is true.
आपको cultural shock एकदम से नहीं मिलता, आपको थोड़ा सा you get a bit of both.
Absolutely.
How was Turkey?
Turkey was very interesting. In the time I went, 93 to 99, which 6 years I stayed there, there was a huge battle going on between the secular and the religious forces, जिसमें Erbakan elect भी हुआ, then he was deposed by the army. हमारे ज़माने में लड़कियों के हिजाब के ऊपर पाबंदी लग गई. They were not able to go to the university in hijab, and there was massive amounts of crisis and trauma going on, which eventually concluded after Recep Erdogan आया तो.
Interesting. But it's also interesting, right? It really connects with your own personal journey, where you're also now beginning to dabble into what do I do, where do I go? Is it वो जो East or West है, वो वैसे तो East or West है, but actually वो philosophies की है, right? And Turkey is also going through the same time. So how was your own evolution during those 6 years as you sort of dabbled between these conversations of अच्छा हिजाब होना चाहिए, नहीं होना चाहिए, government control करना चाहिए, नहीं करना चाहिए, probably going through history as well. Turkey again is a melting pot of recent Islamic history, and so वहाँ पर वो आप बड़े एक interest के साथ आप उसको actually, it's easier to explore that as well. So उस तरह से how did you evolve in those 6 years?
Turkey was actually quite unique. उसकी कोई बात समझ नहीं सकता है जब तक वहाँ you haven't experienced it. This was Pakistan में we see the conflict between the secular mindset and the Islamists, but Turkey में it was at a extreme, far sharper. वहाँ वो लोग एक दूसरे से बात नहीं करते थे, and we were sort of, me and my wife, we were in a very strange place. We were able to talk to both parties. And then we were accepted by the secular people, and we were also very well welcome in the religious circles. So we got an idea of how both sides of the story.
Yeah.
And exactly. So it's very unusual place.
And what were your thoughts, knowing where both sides were coming from?
Well, वहाँ के secular लोग तो basically अतातुर्क ने create किए थे एक generation के who were worshippers of the West, and they were very, very shallow in terms of their thinking. And they would think, my wife used to joke, feminism, women's liberation is very hard everywhere, but in Turkey it's very easy. You just put the skirt on the woman and she's liberated. And so and they had a very, it was very polarized, but there was not much thought on the
fundamentals of actually है क्या जो बात कर रहे हैं उसके पीछे
exactly. What are the issues that we are,
the why of what you're even talking
exactly about. Exactly. Nobody really had deeper thoughts. It was just a मेरी party or तुम्हारी party.
Interesting. And so you were there till 99?
6 years I was there.
Right.
उसके बाद फिर basically वहाँ Turkish educational system के issues थे कि children were growing up into metric type level stuff, and वहाँ पे फिर वो जो stream थी वहाँ available नहीं थी, तो हमने पाकिस्तान आगे लम्स से मुझे ऑफर आया, तो मैं लम्स ज्वाइन कर लिया. 3 साल के लिए मैंने लम्स में पढ़ाया.
इकोनॉमिक्स ही पढ़ा रहे थे आप यहाँ?
हाँ, इकोनॉमिक्स में.
Right. And so the family moved to Lahore?
हाँ, we moved to Lahore.
Right.
Lums was very much an outpost of the West, so it wasn't much different from teaching in the US.
Right.
And I wasn't very happy, and I was there. Wahan there was room to be different and to teach things against capitalism, but basically it's very strongly capitalist. So I eventually received an offer from Islamic University, and I accepted. And there I felt at home. Ye bacche hain, they are not Europeanized. They don't think Eurocentric thoughts. English is a second language to them, and so on.
So what does that mean? Like if I were to ask you, Eurocentric thoughts, and you पहले आपने word use किया?
Eurocentric, Europeanized.
Europeanized, right? So how would you explain that? अब मुझे already पता है कि जो अगर कोई जो यूरोपियनाइज्ड व्यूअर है ना वो अब ऑलरेडी अफेंड हो चुके हैं. रिवर्टिंग बैक टू द टाइम इन टर्की के you hear something, unfortunately even Pakistan may be in that polarized time where you hear a polarizing statement and you immediately turn off.
Exactly. ये तो
पहला काम आप ये करेंगे
का है. Then I don't need to hear anything.
पहला काम करेंगे कि आपको उठा के ना ऐसे डब्बों में डाल देंगे कि आप तो ये हैं, हालांकि शायद आप उनसे भी उतना ही इख्तिलाफ करते होंगे.
Absolutely.
और अपने आप को बंद भी कर लेंगे. So I just want to sort of get in there, right? What's the rationale behind that thought and how do you sort of...
All right, there's a European narrative, which is the Eurocentric narrative, which says that there was nothing in the world before we came on the scene. There is no history. No, history starts in Europe, and it starts with the Renaissance of Europe. Europe was in the Dark Ages. The whole world was in the Dark Ages. There was no thought, and actually, specifically, you find that rational thought is a capability that Europeans discovered, and then the whole world was in darkness. The sun of reason rose in the West, and it depends on date of 13th century to 16th century, according to different authors. And then, after the sun of reason rose, then the Europeans made tremendous progress, leaving behind everybody in the dust, and they became the most advanced civilization by far on the planet. Nobody else can even match, even think about that. Then, out of the greatness of their civilization, they thought, the whole world is in darkness, so we need to go out and civilize them. So they carried this mission, civilizing mission in French, or white man's burden in English, and they spread through the planet to give the benefits of their advanced civilization to the savages and barbarians like us. So this is the Eurocentric narrative, which more or less has been swallowed, and it is part of a European education.
Yeah.
So
not realizing any of the, not acknowledging any of the history of the East.
There's no history other than
the European history, right? Yeah. And just the fundamental part that Asia was 2/3 of the global GDP before the Europeans arrived. And it was like less than 1% when they left, right? So
absolutely. The fact that European deindustrialized India is not known. They built the railroads for us, after all.
Right.
That's their great contribution.
And so you think, do you think, in a way, even after they left, they created structures, directly or indirectly, that ensured that the elite in their colonized lands stick to that British or Western version. ज़ाहिर है वो elite जाता है और वो जाके उन schools में जाता है, वो जाके British जो ये education होती है OA levels में. देख रहा था इस साल 2,10,000 बच्चे जो हैं वो O levels का exam देंगे. That's 2,10,000 of your top students, most educated, most privileged, with the most money, the ones who are prime to control the resources, control the policy, control the academia, and they're all driven by narratives that are completely controlled by the West. So do you
Absolutely. I think you've put the key on the central issue, which is our central problem. Actually, about Macaulay's Minute on Education, which is very famous, because he explicitly expresses the idea that the purpose of our education is to create a class of intermediaries. These people will respect and admire us and be in awe of us, and they will have contempt and hatred for their own culture and people and heritage and religion. And so this is the class that was created by education. अभी लोग कहते हैं कि आपको तो इंडिपेंडेंस हासिल किए हुए 50 years हो गए, 70 years हो गए, मगर actually we've never achieved independence, and we are still intellectually dependent. And the system of colonization is based on assent of the colonized. And assent is acquired through education, educating the colonized to believe that they are inferior. That keeps them in check. And today you can see statements कि हाँ भाई हमारी तो ज़लील कौम है, we are incapable of doing anything, we are corrupt, we are dishonest, we are lazy, we have all faults. And of course, the West has exactly the opposite characteristics. They are honest and they are industrious and they are We have all the good qualities and we have all the bad
मतलब
qualities.
मुझे यही फैसिनेटिंग मतलब ग्रोइंग अप द नैरेटिव इन माय स्कूल्स वाज दैट द मुगल अय्याश थे और आर्ट और पेंटिंग में सारा टाइम गुजार दिया और वेस्ट जो था वो इंटेलेक्ट बना रहा था.
सही है.
और आज जब हम जाते हैं तो हम न्यूयॉर्क म्यूजियम ऑफ हिस्ट्री में जाते हैं और उनकी पेंटिंग्स देखते हैं और कहते हैं यार ये लोग आर्टिस्ट हैं और हम किधर जो है ना जलील हो गए. हम ये नहीं सोचते कि यार वो फॉर द मुगल्स टू बी एबल टू बी देयर वाज बिकॉज देयर सोसाइटी वाज एट पीस. They were creating a lot of economic productivity. And so again it's really just about कि आप किस चीज़ को किस तरह से दिखाओ यानी कि impressionable mind उसको ले लेगा, वो self deprecating हो जाएगा, वो self hating हो जाएगा. और आपका smartest mind पे यही चाहेगा कि यार मैं किसी तरह निकल के वेस्ट में चला जाऊँ और मैं उस sort of empire को build करूँ rather than कि मैं अपने गंदे गलीज लोगों को क्यों.
Absolutely. This is how we were trained to think, how I was trained to think. इस काम से मेरा क्या वास्ता यानी there. Let me follow the leaders.
If I were to give you a counter thought to this, Pakistan तो obviously I understand Pakistan, India, subcontinent की एक अलग reality है. But by and large in the Muslim world, do you think we were able to build rational academic thought to counter this narrative, or एक तो जनरली एंड डू यू थिंक वी आर नाउ बिगिनिंग टू बिल्ड दैट. अब हम अगर हम खासकर जिस तरह मैं इस्लामिक एजुकेशन की बात करता हूँ पाकिस्तान के अंदर, तो आई थिंक वन ऑफ द रीजंस व्हाई लॉजिकल काउंटर नैरेटिव नहीं निकला वो इस वजह से बिकॉज हमने काउंटर नैरेटिव के लिए ना आपको उसी लैंग्वेज में जाना पड़ता है, उसी डोमेन में जाना पड़ता है. आप शट ऑफ नहीं कर सकते, दरवाजे बंद कर दिए और बोला आपने कम्युनिकेट करना होता है. और हमारे यहाँ मुझे याद है अभी मेरी रिसेंटली आई हैड अ कॉन्वर्जेशन विद द वाइस चांसलर एट लम्स. वेरी नाइस गाय, वेरी गुड कॉन्वर्जेशन. आई आस्क्ड हिम वन क्वेश्चन एट द वेरी एंड एंड it made him incredibly uncomfortable. The podcast is available, you guys can check it out. And I asked him, he kept on talking about during the entire conversation, he said, we're all about the learning and we're all about understanding के पाकिस्तान के सबसे बड़े मसाइल क्या हैं, तो हम उसके हिसाब से हम different subject verticals डालते रहेंगे और हम expand करते रहेंगे अपने degree programs. And we're working on gender studies and we're working on this and this and this and all that. So I was like, you guys are doing remarkable work. My understanding is that Pakistan का जो fault line है बहुत बड़ा, उसके अंदर religion is an inherent part of it, and because LUMS is known for its social sciences school, right? It's the philosophy and वो सारा निकल रहा है आपके LUMS से. So why don't you integrate the vertical of Islam in it? Because I think बड़ा एक logical होगा कि जब अगर आप जेंडर स्टडीज़ कर रहे हैं और उसके अंदर अगर आपने इस कौम को करना है तो इस कौम के लिए इस्लाम इम्पॉर्टेंट है, राइट? सो द रिसर्च शुड बी जेंडर स्टडीज़ विद इस्लाम, एंड दैट आई थिंक इज़ एन इनक्रेडिबली पावरफुल रिसर्च. जिस तरह मैं मलेशिया में देख रहा था कि मेरे माई सन वॉज बॉर्न एंड माई मदर केप्ट ऑन सेइंग कि उसको शहद खिलाओ और वो होगा, इट्स एन एज ओल्ड वो. तो मैंने उसके ऊपर गूगल करके रिसर्च की तो मुझे मलेशिया में मिला उनके एक डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ मेडिसिन और डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ इस्लामिक थियोलॉजी ने मिलके एक रिसर्च की और उन्होंने बैठ के उसमें बताया कि नहीं शहद नहीं करना चाहिए, और उसके उन्होंने हदीस को पूरा का पूरा स्टेप बाय स्टेप ब्रेक डाउन किया. उन्होंने कहा वो क्या था क्या नहीं था, किस चीज़ को किस तरह से उन्होंने किया हुआ था. एंड शहद एक्चुअली हैज़ हेल्थ के प्रॉब्लम्स जो कि छोटे बच्चे को नहीं करने चाहिए. And so for me that answered the question, right? As a question of religion backed by science, जो कि मुझे ऐसा बंदा उसको सिर्फ साइंटिफिक क्वेश्चन होता तो वो कहता है यार पता नहीं, बट
सही है.
तो इंटरडिसिप्लिनरी बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है. अच्छा, I asked him that question and you can see in the camera he became incredibly uncomfortable, right? Like he was like उससे पहले I would talk about Islamic, I would talk about philosophy, I would talk about any social science, he'd be like, yes, we need to do this and we need to do this. But suddenly Islam, as even though it is a philosophy, right? He first of all he was like पता नहीं मैंने क्या सवाल कर दिया है. Then he started to talk about कि हाँ हम कर रहे हैं बहुत कुछ, हम जेंडर स्टडीज़ कर रहे हैं and I could feel कि even he on some level is worried about कि यार वो जो एक क्राउड है वो जब देखेगा और वो सुनेगा और अगर मेरे मुंह से ये बात निकल गई कि मैं इस्लामिक एजुकेशन नहीं
के खिलाफ,
इस्लामिक रिसर्च, मैं तो ये भी नहीं कह रहा कि आप इस्लाम, क्योंकि इस्लामिक एजुकेशन को तो वो कहते हैं ना कि इंडोक्ट्रिनेशन की तरफ जाए.
एग्जैक्टली.
मैं तो रिसर्च की बात कर रहा हूँ, प्लेन एंड सिंपल, राइट? कि आप पढ़ो तो सही, आप देखो, आप एथियस्ट भी हो, रिसर्च तो कर सकते हो कि यार ये इस टेक्स्ट में क्या था, इसकी पूरी हिस्ट्री है. And that's where I was like, we had this issue where the Islamic is too Islamic and they reject the science, and the scientist is too scientist and they reject the philosophy, right? And जब तक वो interdisciplinary engagement नहीं होगी, you can't move forward. So, sorry, मैंने बहुत एक context बढ़ा दिया.
This is very important.
But the core question here is, do you think as the Muslim world, we are now beginning to move towards a part where we can actually now begin to give a counter to a lot of what we've talked about earlier.
Muzamil, I'm very impressed. You have asked the sort of the key question, which is at the jugular. Actually, the central problem is Western education, which indoctrinates us into a Eurocentric way of thinking, which teaches us that basically they don't even have to say anything about West and East. In 4 years, you read only textbooks written by Western intellectuals or their followers, and you learn that all knowledge has been produced by the West. Nobody else has any share in it. So automatically you understand that West is superior. Now the problem is that we have no alternative to this. Madrasa is not an alternative. It teaches you the traditional Uloom, but it doesn't teach you how these Uloom apply to the modern world. Now, you see, that is actually my interest, to show that actually the Uloom that have been given to us in the form of the Quran can be used to solve modern problems, and in a much better way than anything that the West has been able to provide. Magar, this is at the moment, this is just a claim without evidence. And I'm working on it, but so this is the central problem facing Islamic schools, Islamic education. On the one hand, an Islamic education claims that the Quran is the most valuable piece of knowledge that mankind possesses. On the other hand, they are teaching only Western sciences. तो इसका solution ये है कि you have to understand कि the West redefined the meaning of knowledge, epistemology, because they rejected Christianity, so they rejected everything that goes along with that in their own history. And they said, okay, knowledge only comes from observations and logic, and real knowledge is only of science, which means knowledge is only of the external world. जो हमारी internal दुनिया है उसके बारे में, that doesn't count as knowledge. So that means कि basically Western education, जो Islamic education, it teaches us how to become a human being. Allah Ta'ala कहते हैं لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. So inside the human being there's the capability of becoming worse than the devils and higher than the angels. So how can we become better than the angels? أحسن तक़वीम कैसे पहुँच सकते हैं? This is the whole message of Islam. Now, no matter how much chemistry, biology, physics you study, you will never learn how to be a better human being. But this kind of knowledge is not valued in the West because the West values the man who can make the most money. The value of a man is according to the amount of money he can earn. For that, you need to be a human resource. So if you say, "Acha, how will Islamic knowledge help me make more money?" You will say, no, it won't. So then it's useless. But you say, if you ask the question, which they don't ask, how can I become a better human being? But the problem is that today, because the world is, if you're practically, you're setting I want to set up an Islamic school. If you say, I'll teach people how to become better human beings, no one will send your children to your school. They say, I want my son to be able to get a good job. So this is a very difficult dilemma of creating a educational system which will create a balanced human being, one who can earn money, but who doesn't make earning money the goal of his life. And this is
interesting. You're talking about capitalism.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I want to dive into that. And you, again, your core area of study and has been economics.
Absolutely.
And so let's talk about systems. हमारे recent times में हमने तो 2 systems सुने हैं जी. हमने सुना है कि एक कैपिटलिज्म होता है और एक कम्युनिज्म होता है और उसके अलावा दुनिया में कोई सिस्टम ही नहीं होता.
सही.
Can you give me an alternate system? And can you define the differences potentially? Because sure. When I look at communism, I see a system that is inherently communal, and so it ties with the Eastern thought, but it isn't as driven by growth and productivity as capitalism was, and so capitalism grew very, very rapidly, and it was able to defeat it. And then you see capitalism, and you see capitalism converging towards sort of this crony capitalist West जो हम आज देखते हैं. और आज इस साल बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग टाइम एक्चुअली हम ये कॉन्वर्जेशन कर रहे हैं, बिकॉज शायद लास्ट ईयर करते थे लोग कहते हैं क्या सीन है. अभी वो दरारें बहुत ज़्यादा नज़र आ रही हैं अमेरिकन सिस्टम के अंदर, अमेरिकन इकोनॉमिक सिस्टम के अंदर, एंड पीपल आर नाउ aggressively beginning to talk about it, about the collapse of the dollar, about the fact that literally it's quack economics where they're pumping dollars into the system with no end in sight, and वो एक मुर्दा लाश को जो है वो कर तो जा रहे हैं, but वो कब तक कर लेंगे, right? So its context is much more there, and my thought in this is that the Islamic system was somewhere in the middle. Would take some of the utilitarian principles of capitalism and some of the inherent social principles of communism, but was one that allowed for Islam to spread so rapidly. It was less of the philosophy and more of the way of life, and actually the physical change and peace building that allowed for a lot of people to hop onto that system early on in the days.
Right. This has been the general view among Islamic economists that Islamic economics is just a variety of capitalism, although some have also taken the opposite point of view, it's a variety of communism. But I think neither is right. Basically, capitalism, communism, socialism, they're all one in terms of assessing material prosperity, taking material prosperity to the goal of life. And capitalism is built on a very Darwinian worldview. It says that life is a jungle, we are just animals, life is fierce competition, cutthroat competition, and winner takes all, and basically the purpose of life is to maximize pleasure. This is explicitly written into the texts of. So this is not our So basically you can say, if you want to make it a slogan, that capitalism is built on competition and individualism and greed and hedonism. Greed is good. But Islam is based on generosity, cooperation, community, social responsibility. These are values that are antithetical to capitalism. So now there was such a system in existence for 1,000 years. हमारे यहाँ social responsibility, what does it mean? It means that the society as a whole has a responsibility to every member to make sure that they have all their basic needs. So agar hum log, if you talk about current economic crisis, I say that there's just one Islamic principle which will solve the crisis, and that is all of the children in Pakistan are my children. Just take responsibility. And now all policies must be ensured to make sure that these children have a future. एक बात कर लो, बाकी किसी चीज़ की परवाह नहीं है. तो but the capitalism is actually exactly the opposite of that. It's थोड़ा सा इसमें गहराई में जाना पड़ता है, क्योंकि capitalism has a face which it creates to make it palatable. But the reality, and one doesn't have to dig very deep, it is that capitalism depends on having a labor force which can be exploited. Therefore, poverty is essential to the survival of capitalism. Or, I've detailed this in some other places. There was a period from 1930 to about 1980, before the Reagan-Thatcher revolution, where Keynesian economics was dominant. Keynesian economics का जो central principle है वो ये है कि government should create full employment.
Right.
तो full employment means
joblessness होनी नहीं चाहिए.
हाँ, joblessness नहीं होनी चाहिए, zero. तो when everybody got jobs, then there was a period of unprecedented prosperity in the West. Piketty ने भी लिखा है कि this was a very unusual period. Capitalism में कभी ऐसा नहीं हुआ है कि everybody had jobs and everybody was happy except for the top 1%. If you look at the graph, it's amazing. Top 1% का जो share है, it goes from like 30% to 10%, which is they actually specifically, explicitly, openly plotted a counter revolution. इसका पूरी details मिलती हैं कि what they did and how they planned. And वो shock doctrine है ना नेम की, उसमें उसने लिखा है कि they said कि अच्छा ये plans तो हमने बना लिए हैं, but how will we implement? We need to wait for some crisis which occurs, then everybody will confuse, and then we will be there first with our plans, and nobody will understand what's happening. And so that's what the shock doctrine.
So जो आज वो कहते हैं कि 2% inflation and a certain amount of joblessness is always good for the economy. So someone has to lose in the entire game for
this is
the
not
system
true.
to work.
As long as if you don't allow for if you don't if the rich are not as powerful, then actually the main principle has scarcity, which was also introduced by economists in early 20th century. This scarcity is also an illusion. There is no scarcity in the sense that right now there's enough food to feed everybody on the planet. There's enough money to take care of all the needs. Yani America ka jo defense budget hai, it's enough to take care of the housing, health, education, all needs of everyone on the planet.
The amount of money that they spent on Afghanistan, if they had spent the same money building that country,
yes,
it's just many folds more than the Marshall Plan that they came with.
It's quite amazing, and it seems a bit strange. And actually, a mentality. And if they had actually spent money on the reconstruction of the Iraqi Qawm, would be their slaves. Yani emotionally, they would be ready to do whatever the Americans. They were actually ready. They welcomed the Americans as liberators, and the American troops also thought that we are going in as liberators, but it turned out not to be. So if they had spent money on rebuilding Iraq as they had promised, the Iraq would actually be in their hands
100%.
Instead of being hated by Iran and being subject to a lot of violent attacks everywhere.
But that's what I'm saying. Hota ye hai ke nature is beautiful in a way that it sort of balances itself out, right? And so we're now seeing the results of American excess as they went around plundering and destroying essentially civilizations.
Yes, civilization. Libya,
Iraq, Afghanistan. They've just it's I would just use the word incredible, but in a very different tone.
Yes,
what's happened there, right?
Yes.
But now we're seeing that China is coming in, and they're now showing some very real challenge to the American, and I'm not even saying the American state or the American sort of imperial power. I'm saying the American way of life. It's the system that China is now challenging. जो कि आजकल अमेरिकन्स बहुत ज़्यादा कह रहे हैं कि फ्री वर्ल्ड को चैलेंज किया जा रहा है, डेमोक्रेसी को चैलेंज किया जा रहा है, रूल बेस्ड ऑर्डर को चैलेंज किया जा रहा है, बट इट्स जस्ट योर ऑर्डर वर्सेस देयर ऑर्डर. एंड सो यहाँ पर एक क्वेश्चन मार्क जो मेरे लिए आजकल बहुत ज़्यादा चीज़ थॉट को वो कर रही है ना, वो ये कर रही है कि हमने एक बल्कि बिफोर आई गेट इनटू दैट, देखिए अमेरिका इज़ अ डोमिनेंट पावर, सो जनरली मोर ऑफ आवर कॉन्वर्सेशंस रिवॉल्व अराउंड दैट. यार कैपिटलिज्म में क्या मसला था और वो हम किस तरह से इस्लामिक इकोनॉमिक सिस्टम डिफरेंट है. लेट्स टॉक अबाउट कम्युनिज्म. लेट्स टॉक अबाउट व्हाट वाज हैपनिंग इन रशिया. And where did Islamic economic system stand compared to the Russian communist style of?
There are overlaps, of course. Magar basically, you have to see that the Islamic economic system is right now just a dream.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist currently anywhere in the world. So, but there are some things which Russia did, which was to basically ensure that everybody has basic living, and that's part of an Islamic system, to make sure that everybody can eat and drink, and that basically it's the responsibility of the society to ensure that minimal needs of all members are met, and that is part of communist, from each one according to his ability, to each according to his need. So that is one element of Islam which was part of communist principles, also socialist principles.
But do you think again वो एक general वो तो था एक element, लेकिन जिस तरह इस्लाम ने Islam allowed you कि आप business करें, आप prosper करें, आपके पास पैसा है, वो ये नहीं कर रहे कि यार just because you're making money through halal ways. उन्होंने define कर दिया कि यार इतनी ज़कात दो अपने assets के ऊपर, था ये दो. So do you think कि जो So now I'll come to my follow-up question. वो कहते हैं China is communism. They use a word, capitalist principles. Socialism with capitalist principle, or capitalism with Chinese principles, or something like that. What they're trying to say is कि हमारा DNA communist था. हमने ये realize किया कि communism के certain shortfalls थे. तो उसके ऊपर हमने certain incentivization built in कर दी. right? But while we built in those incentivizations, we've also ensured so what I'm seeing now as the world moves forward is कि हमें certain European countries के अंदर जो Scandinavian countries हैं उसके अंदर कुछ certain principles नज़र आ रहे हैं, जिसमें जो आपने बोला कि basic minimal viable standard of life जो कि हर थोड़े से बाद अपग्रेड होती रहेगी, तो उसके अंदर वो जो है ना वो मेक श्योर कर रहे हैं कि अपग्रेड होती रहे कि अच्छा जी एजुकेशन हमने देनी है, क्वालिटी ऑफ एजुकेशन हमने देनी है, हमने एक सर्टन मिनिमल, आप नई नौकरी कर रहे हैं तब भी आपको एक सर्टन पैसा मिलता है कि आप अपना खाना खा सकते हैं. एक इवन द वर्स्ट यूरोपियन इन दैट कंट्री इज़ प्रोटेक्टेड इन अ सर्टन वे.
एब्सोल्युटली.
और फिर उसके ऊपर वो अलाउ करते हैं विद नॉट अ लॉट ऑफ वेरियंस, राइट. सो वो जैसे जैसे बहुत ज़्यादा, मतलब वहाँ पे मैं देखता हूँ कि वहाँ पे जो CEO है कंपनी का, वो भी एक छोटे से घर में ही रह रहा है. उसकी भी जो इंटरेस्ट है वो यही है कि वो प्याज उगाए और वो बाईसाइकिल करे और वो ये करे वो करे. वो ये नहीं है कि वो जी बड़े बड़े यार्ड्स में फिर रहा है और वो एक्सेसेस उसमें रह रहा है. एंड देन चाइना में हाँ हम देख रहे हैं कि बहुत सारे बिलियनर्स इमर्ज कर रहे हैं और ये कर रहे हैं और वो कर रहे हैं, बट बिकॉज उसने सर्टन जो चीज़ें हमने डिस्कस की कि सर्टन एक्सेसेस ऑफ कैपिटलिज्म को कट किया और उसको इंश्योर किया कि यार जहाँ पर वो उनकी अगर प्रॉपर्टी के बहुत क्वैक्ट्री होने लगती है तो गवर्नमेंट आती है और आके उसको ब्रेक करती है और मोनोपोली को बहुत कंट्रोल करती है. तो उस तरह से दे वर एबल टू देन इमर्ज फॉरवर्ड एज अ मोर potentially a more powerful system, right? Where the Americans were investing in weaponry and wars, the Chinese were investing in the human development, and so that is what is going to drive that massive change in the future. So उस तरह से then how do you reconcile that with the Islamic system?
हाँ देखो, I think this is a very good question in the sense के जो crucial चीज़ है ना चाइना के बारे में वो ये है कि there is one party, the Communist Party, and it is in control. And it will remain in control for the foreseeable future. So they can do long-range planning. The biggest problem in Pakistan is that everyone is in the game for only 2-3 years. So, chahe army ho, chahe politicians ho, they know that we are here for 3 years. So nobody does any long-range planning. They're all get my piece of the pie and get out quickly. So without long-range planning, you cannot prosper. And there's complete. And our political system is geared to prevent long-range planning, and without so that's one of the fundamental problems. That the policies are all there. I was on the Economic Advisors Council, and I was on Pakistan Institute of Development Economics का Vice Chancellor था मैं. The official think tank of the government. I was on many very senior committees. And our job was to give advice to the government. And we did, but nobody was interested in the least because they already knew what they had to do. They knew, if I give them advice, कि अच्छा ये जो है ये आपको 5 years में you will get prosperity, they didn't care. They all they were looking at in a plan was, इसमें मेरी cut कहाँ से आएगी? And if they had their cut, then they would say, okay, let's go ahead and do it. And if it didn't bring them prestige or popularity or power or money, then they said, okay, this plan is useless for me.
There is a certain chatter now which begins to say कि यार दुनिया ये जो concept है ना of democracy and free world and power of the people in this way कि यार वोट करके वो करेंगे, वो अब चेंज होता नज़र आ रहा है. अगेन चाइनीज़ वन पार्टी होता ये ना कि जो डोमिनेंट पावर होती है तो आपके लिए बड़ा लॉजिकल होता है कि यार देखो America and their system of democracy is good because we've seen America progress.
Exactly.
But the day that the Chinese become the world's largest economy, which is a couple of years remaining.
They are already the biggest player in terms of international trade.
Absolutely.
And their trade shares are larger than the Americans. So international impact के एतबार से China is bigger than the USA.
Absolutely. And I was talking to someone yesterday and he's in the fashion industry and he was like, लोगों को नज़र नहीं आ रहा, but last year every major fashion retailer had a bad sort of financial cycle, and the only one player that actually made money was Louis Vuitton, and that was because Louis Vuitton is huge in China, so they made money because the Chinese buyer was still buying and the rest of the world was in recession, right? So as more and more companies begin to realize that the buyer is in China and China is where the growth's at, तो वो converge करेगी पूरी thought, and as that thought converges, ये एक बड़ा जो कि हमारे लिए बहुत सारे, मतलब मेरे लिए पर्टिकुलरली आपके टाइम पे तो फिर भी देयर वाज दिस क्वेश्चन मार्क ऑफ USSR वर्सेस USA एंड कम्युनिज्म वर्सेस कैपिटलिज्म, इस्लामिक वर्ल्ड तो एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता था, बट हमारे टाइम के ऊपर तो हमने देखा ही सॉर्ट ऑफ अमेरिका एज द लोन हेजेमन एंड दैट सिस्टम एज द मोस्ट पावरफुल सिस्टम. बट नाउ दैट्स गोइंग टू चेंज. नाउ वी आर गोइंग टू बिगिन टू सी कि यार अच्छा नहीं, वन पार्टी सिस्टम भी हो सकता है और वो इट्स नॉट इवल, इट्स नॉट डिक्टेटरशिप, यू नो, इट्स
एग्जैक्टली.
एंड देन वी, इसमें मैं 2-3 चीज़ें कहना चाहूँगा जिसके ऊपर, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान में इतना इनबिल्ट हुआ हुआ है डेमोक्रेसी ने इतना बेचा है उसको कि काउंटर थॉट है. मैं नहीं कह रहा दूसरी साइड अच्छी है, मैं सिर्फ काउंटर थॉट की बात कर रहा हूँ, थॉट एक्सपेरिमेंट है कि डेमोक्रेसी का एलिमेंट ये होता है, the thought is it's an insurance policy, right? So when you create a great system that really works, so the Romans and the British and all of those who championed democracy was when they were so advanced compared to the rest that they didn't want one person to sort of screw it up. And so they said, let's devolve power so that when the change comes, you have to have the buy-in of everyone for the change to happen in the first place. For countries that are underdeveloped, they need to reform very rapidly to be able to go and upgrade themselves. Now, in a system like, again, Pakistan or India or a lot of these developing countries, when you're constantly stuck by कि यार मुझे सबको पहले समझाना है कि तुम्हारे लिए बेहतर है, it becomes excruciatingly slow to keep making that change. And so global south हमेशा उस पे ही रहता है. Now, historically हमने देखा कि जिन्होंने उससे जो निकले भी हैं वो निकले हैं, मिडल ईस्ट निकला है, अथॉरिटेरियन गवर्नमेंट्स थी. मलेशिया निकला, 27 ईयर्स एक प्रेसिडेंट उनका रहकर गया और उसने पूरा का पूरा रिफॉर्म किया. टर्की सडनली ग्लोबल स्टेज पे आना शुरू हुआ, तो इन अ वे वो अथॉरिटेरियन होना शुरू हो गए, राइट. एंड उसके ऊपर बड़ा बैकलैश आया बिकॉज द वेस्टर्न पावर्स वर लाइक, ओह माय गॉड, अथॉरिटेरियनिज्म तो बहुत बुरा है. बट उसी अथॉरिटेरियनिज्म ने हमने देखना भी ये शुरू किया कि अच्छा इन द फर्स्ट 2-3 ईयर्स अथॉरिटेरियनिज्म बेचा, बट नाउ दे आर बिगिनिंग टू डू अ लॉट ऑफ पॉलिसीज दैट द वेस्ट doesn't agree with, and now they're actually doing this with a lot of buy-in from their public, right?
Yes.
So do you think that we are going towards, as the West puts it, an authoritarian and fascist future? When I look at Modi, for example, the Pakistani in me is like, oh, look at him, he's so authoritarian, he's so anti-Muslims, and he's doing this and that. But the fact is that the objective thought in me would be like, hey, okay, now I feel like he's really going to make India a global power because he's collective अपने एक majority define की, उसने उस majority को पकड़ के power उससे निकाली और उस power को वो use कर रहा है to think for India. And nobody is able to challenge him anymore, so he is able to do that long-term planning that it may be required. And I can agree and disagree with his policies for a marginalized community or for this or for that, but objectively speaking, as a developing nation, India, it is going to be that authoritarian figure that is going to catapult them to a global stage. And again, looking at China, maybe you need some sort of that authoritarianism for a developing nation to, have a more long-term strategic growth plan. What do you think about that?
I think that there is one essential element which is missing from this analysis, although it hits on the truth somewhat, and that is the class struggle. Yani, what is happening here is that we have in Pakistan a colonial economy. What happened in the colonized times was that the British set up a factory to extract money from India and to send it overseas, and somebody has calculated that £1 trillion or something was sent in current money. बहुत बड़ी रकम है. So this machine was in place, and then the British left, but the machine remained the same. It is a machine to extract money from the masses. It is not a machine to develop the masses. The goal was never to develop the masses. So the elite class in Pakistan speaks a different language, Urdu medium, English medium. They have completely different lifestyles. They have different ambitions, vision for Pakistan. And they have a sort of a benevolent attitude कि masses जो है हमारे जाहिल हैं, अनपढ़ हैं, उनको हम बतलाएंगे कि what it means to live, what their vision should be. The masses have their own vision, and यानी वो मदीना चाहते हैं, वो लंदन चाहते हैं. तो because of this, centralized authority is not the issue. Is not going to make a difference. If the central authority tries to push the masses toward London, they will never succeed. And the centralized authority currently, with the complete Eurocentric indoctrination, will not say, okay, let's follow the masses towards Medina. So we are stuck at an impasse which is different from that of the other countries. तो ये जो है ये क्लास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट इसको कैसे ओवरकम किया जाए, आई डोंट नो. बट बेसिकली द करंट सिस्टम इज़ न्यू कॉलोनियल. इस वक्त जो द पार्टी विच कम्स इन पावर, वी हैव अ पंप फॉर एक्सट्रैक्टिंग मनी एंड दे जस्ट टेक देयर शेयर एंड दे से कि अच्छा नाउ इट्स माई टर्न. एंड सो इट्स बेसिकली नोबडी इज़ इंटरेस्टेड इन डेवलपिंग पाकिस्तान. दे आर जस्ट इंटरेस्टेड इन गेटिंग देयर ओन शेयर. इवन इट्स वेरी स्ट्रेंज. ये जो नवाज शरीफ ने टैक्सी स्कीम चलाई, तो who are going, suppose that instead of taxis he had said, okay, let's spread bicycles to the people. So he would reach thousands more, he would got many more votes. Magar wo votes wo log ke hain jo are disenfranchised, so they're not concerned. He's only talking to the people who are urban and basically any part of the electorate. The disenfranchised masses are not on the picture, not on the scene. तो उनके लिए क्या करना है? We spend billions on metro, but roads to rural areas which would improve the lives of the villagers, they're not of concern except कोई politician अगर कोई show करना चाहे तो. So that's the thing, that the interest of the masses is not the concern. तो इसलिए ये जो centralized power है, चाहे democracy है, it's not going to make a difference until we overcome this issue of.
But in terms of, when I say I'm not necessarily saying centralized power, what I mean more is, again, the word that I use is authoritarian, right? So what we're seeing in Philippines, for example, Philippines is growing very rapidly, but there is a very authoritarian sort of figurehead there. We're seeing the same in India, where the so Congress was very Western thought, then suddenly internal उससे एक emerge करता है, जो कि बहुत इंडिया सेंट्रिक है. और इंडिया और अपनी मेजॉरिटी, मैं अगेन माइनॉरिटीज़ के मसले हैं इंडिया के अंदर, बट वो अपनी मेजॉरिटी की थॉट के अराउंड वो सोचता है और उसको आगे लेकर जाता है. You begin to see the same thing in Turkey, for example. कि Turkey was this sort of a ignored child जो कि EU में घुसने की कोशिश कर रहा था. Till the time Erdogan came, and you can argue all about कि जी economics वहाँ पे आप हो रही है, डाउन हो रही है, ये हो रहा है या वो हो रहा है, but the fact is कि Turkey is now beginning to take a leadership position in that region. मिडल ईस्ट के अंदर हमने ऑलरेडी वो देखा. सो व्हाट आई बेसिकली मीन टू से इज कि डजंट मैटर इफ इट्स डेमोक्रेसी, डजंट मैटर इफ इट्स वन पार्टी सिस्टम, वो आप उसको फिक्स कर सकते हैं टू इंश्योर के बेटर रिप्रेजेंटेशन फ्रॉम द मैसेज एंड वो थॉट लिनियर हो. अगेन उसमें वो सिंगल नेशनल करिकुलम हो गया, उसमें जो है वो और बहुत सारे रोड मैप ऐसे हो गए विच अलाउ फॉर बेटर. वो तो मैं आपसे एग्री करता हूँ कि जब आपने अपना CSS अंग्रेजी में रखा है और आपकी इवन कोर्ट्स की जजमेंट अंग्रेजी में होती है और आपकी मैसेज, यानी कि जजमेंट है ना, हर किसी का उसका ताल्लुक है, वो अंग्रेजी में कैसे हो सकती है? इट मेक्स नो सेंस टू मी. जो आपका कोर्स CSS का एग्जाम है वो अंग्रेजी में कैसे हो सकता है? आपने बाय डिज़ाइन कह दिया कि यार तुम्हारी थॉट बेशक दुनिया की बेस्ट थॉट हो, बट कम्युनिकेशन की वजह से तुम नहीं आ सकते.
Exactly.
जो गेट कीपिंग है वो इट्स राइट, इट्स सो बिल्ट इन दैट इट्स इनक्रेडिबल. बट वो अगर आप फिक्स कर भी लें, जो करंट सिस्टम है जिसके अंदर वो इन्होंने इंटेंशनली वीक रखा हुआ था, सो दैट देयर इज़ ऑलवेज दैट इन्वॉल्वमेंट ऑफ द ग्लोबल नॉर्थ, मैं कहूँगा, जो कि आके आपको मैनूवर थ्रू कर लेती है. दे कैन ईजिली वो एंड देयर वाज अ सर्टेन लेवल ऑफ, इट वाज ओनली द अथॉरिटेरियन गवर्नमेंट्स जिन्होंने जाके ग्लोबल नॉर्थ को जाके बोला कि नहीं हम कुछ कर रहे हैं और हमें ये करना है और आप उसको हमें टच नहीं कर सकते. एंड सो इन अ वे the sovereignty of the state became much higher, and from that the state began to draw its power, and we're seeing that power being drawn in India and Turkey and a lot of other countries, and in a way China drew that power as well, right? That's my question. Again, I don't agree or disagree with it.
I think you have put your finger on the essential issue. देखो जो colonizers हैं ना, they draw their power from outside. यानी इस वक्त जो है वो जेसन हिकल की स्टडी है कि ओवर द पास्ट फ्यू ईयर्स अबाउट $1 trillion in aid was poured in from aid हो, foreign investment हो, वगैरह वगैरह, all sorts of money, incoming money from the rich countries to the poor countries, and about 3.3 trillion was sent back. So basically, this is colonization. So ये 1.1 trillion, this is like, this gives you salaries to your agents who are now brown instead of white. It provides them with the weapons and the armies and the power and the institutions which they need to keep their masses suppressed. So the other option, which is the one that you're mentioning, is that instead of deriving your power from the foreigners, you derive it from your own masses. So that is what happened in Turkey. जब मैं था उस ज़माने में, तो the masses were suppressed. Masses were very strongly Muslim, because there was a small secular minority which was ruling over them, and the masses could not express even their religion. यानी अजान भी बैन हो गई थी किस ज़माने में. That was just to illustrate how strongly the. So when Erbakan came into power, basically the masses were with him. And so he was able to mobilize the power of the masses, which is exactly what you're talking about. So here also, we need a leader whose vision is aligned with that of the masses, so that he can use the power of the people. Then he can defy the foreign powers. The people who are relying on foreign powers to rule their own country cannot defy the foreign powers. And the agenda of the foreign powers is to keep the country enslaved forever and colonized forever, because they're extracting a huge amount of money.
Makes sense. I'm not going to go any further, but उससे आप बहुत सारे पैरेलल्स ड्रॉ करना शुरू कर सकते हैं. व्हाट्स हैपनिंग. मैं थोड़ा सा मूव ऑन करूँगा टू द नेक्स्ट. इसमें बस एक लास्ट कमेंट मैं आपका लूँगा कि अगर आप आज के इसको देखें, प्रैक्टिकली स्पीकिंग, पाकिस्तान के इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस को, तो आपका अगर if one question के how do you see the resolution of it? What's the problem and how do you see the resolution of it?
Yeah, okay. I have a lecture on this, but basically the real problem is very simple, and the solution is also very simple. But politically, it's not feasible. The very simple problem is that we bought $60 million of imports, 60 billion, and we sold $30 billion of exports. तो किसी भी घर का देख लो, अगर हमारा बजट 30 बिलियन है, तो अगर हम $60 billion की चीज़ें खरीदेंगे, तो हम will be in a crisis. And what is exactly the source of the crisis? कि we borrow 30 billion, and then the person who lends us 30 billion dictates their terms. एक बहुत मशहूर इकोनॉमिस्ट है माइकल हेडसन, उसने कहा कि मेरा फर्स्ट जॉब सिटी बैंक में था, and the first thing they assigned me to do was they were planning to make a big loan to a Latin American country. उन्होंने कहा कि इसकी जरा capability assess करो कि कितने डॉलर्स पे करें. तो I came back with some easy calculation. उन्होंने कहा कि everything they have earned over the next 10 years is already committed. There is no way they can pay back. तो much to my surprise, Citibank went ahead and gave them the loan. तो मैंने कहा कि ये तुम लोग ने क्या किया? तो उन्होंने कहा कि असल में बात ये है कि वो तो when they need the money, we will give them more loans to repay, and this loan gives us the power over their policies, and that's worth much more than the money. So this is exactly the thing. So now, what is the solution to this problem? The solution is very simple. The solution is you should reduce your imports. मगर nobody is talking about the solution. आपको on the forum you will find कि अच्छा taxes बढ़ाओ और corruption कम करो और good governance हो और export promotion हो. These are all ridiculous. यानी a person is borrowing money to buy things. You say कि अच्छा तुम अपनी income बढ़ाओ. भाई, reduce your expenditures. And this is how, if you look at history, this is actually called import substitution. Instead of having other people make our goods and buying it by borrowing money, which is a very stupid thing to do, make whatever you need yourself. If you want to go into practical details, there are two things that are the biggest parts of our import bill. One is energy, and the other is agricultural products. Now, it's very strange that agricultural products ko hame import karna, but we import sunflower seeds from Brazil. It's really astounding. Yani sunflower seeds ko ugane mein kya lagta hai? So, if we, there are some very massive problems with our agriculture sector, but if we straighten them out, we could be self-sufficient in agriculture. Energy में भी ये OGDC वाले कहते हैं कि there are many schemes, I have seen them myself, lying on the tables, how to make Pakistan energy self-sufficient in 3 to 5 years. Short term में Iran is ready to sell us cheap energy, मगर वो big powers won't let us buy from them. So we can solve our crisis in 2 minutes by just getting cheap energy from energy and making sure that we have agricultural self-sufficiency and cutting down on imports. Once we don't have imports, at the level that we need. We don't need to borrow. We can make independent policy. मगर बजाय इसके कि this very simple solution being suggested, it's nowhere on the table. क्या बात है एक्सपोर्ट प्रमोशन? क्या हम लोग यानी 20 साल से एक्सपोर्ट प्रमोशन बात कर रहे हैं और होके नहीं देता. अगर हो जाता तो बहुत अच्छा था, मगर हो नहीं रहा है. Anyway, you see the idea of exports and FDI and all of those things, this is actually inherently against development. यानी why should we, हमारी अवाम भूखी है, नंगी है, instead of manufacturing clothes for them and goods for them, why should we spend all our talent in building goods for the consumption of foreigners? It just doesn't make any sense. Why? Because अच्छा जो key है ना यहाँ पे, again this is the class divide. What basically our economy is built on is selling the wheat and the rice of our population to foreigners to get dollars so that our elite upper class can buy luxury goods for themselves. This is what our economy is currently. And that's why proposal which says, okay, let's become agricultural self-sufficient, let's reduce our imports, this will never sell to the upper class because that will mean cutting down their lifestyle.
Interesting. थोड़ा सा मैं इसे कन्वर्ज करता हूँ एंड आई थोड़ा सा एक डिफरेंट टॉपिक है बट है उस तरह से कनेक्टेड ही. जब हम इस्लामिक इकोनॉमिक सिस्टम की बात करते हैं ना पाकिस्तान में बाय एंड लार्ज, तो पीपल टेंड टू कम टू जस्ट दिस वन थिंग,
इंटरेस्ट. सही है.
सूद हराम है और सूद है कि नहीं है, और लोन्स बैंक्स क्रेडिट्स ये ख़राब है, हराम है, और फिर वो एक कॉम्प्लिकेटेड एज द वर्ल्ड बिकम्स मोर एंड मोर कॉम्प्लेक्स, एज द इकोनॉमिक्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड बिकम्स मोर एंड मोर कॉम्प्लेक्स, इट इज़ बिकमिंग मोर एंड मोर डिफ़िकल्ट फॉर पीपल टू, क्योंकि देखें अगर आप उसको इतना सिंपल कर देंगे और जब चीज़ कॉम्प्लेक्स होना शुरू हो जाएगी तो फिर बेसिक सी चीज़ है कि यार अगर ब्लैक एंड वाइट है और अगर आप उसमें से कुछ भी ग्रे एरिया आ रहा है तो फिर सडनली यू विल बिगिन टू फील लाइक यार मैं कुछ अन इस्लामिक कर रहा हूँ. फिर आप एक चीज़ अन इस्लामिक थाट के साथ कर रहे हैं तो फिर आप कह रहे हैं मैं सब अन इस्लामिक कर लेता हूँ. और उसके अंदर हम देख रहे हैं कि अच्छा उसमें इस्लामिक बैंकिंग भी आ रही है, शरिया कंप्लाइंस भी आ रहा है, सो ऑन एंड सो फोर्थ. आउटकम एग्जैक्टली सेम है, पीछे से सिर्फ कान को आप डिफरेंट हाथ से पकड़ रहे हैं. अच्छा, in a way when I speak to people about interest and particularly एक तो वो इंटरेस्ट है आपका जिसमें आप कहते हैं कि यार लोन लेके एक्सट्रैक्टिव तरीके से, जो लोन शार्क्स होती हैं राइट, आजकल ये ऐप्स के ऊपर बड़ा आ रहा है जी, 25,000 रुपये लेके वो हफ्ते करके महीने में वो 40-50,000 निकलवा लेते हैं और पूरी ज़िंदगी आपको ब्लैकमेल करते रहते हैं. और एक दूसरा है कि आप कहते हैं कि जो बैंक्स का वो आ गया कि यार काइबोर प्लस लेट्स से 2%, राइट. सो essentially what you're saying is that 2% is what is the actual amount that we're taking on it, and the Kaibor is basically the interest that's just accumulating on it. So the inflation that you're protecting it from, right? So ये बड़ा एक important element है कि बैंक जो है वो effectively inflation वो कर रहा है. अब मेरे लिए जो question mark आता है वो ये आता है कि modern day paper currency की consistent devaluation when it stopped being backed by gold, how is that reconciled with the Islamic system when that was talking about something that is hedged by gold essentially, right? जब आपने मॉडर्न डे करेंसी ऐसी कर ली जिसमें मैं अगर फॉर एग्जांपल 100 रुपया देता हूँ, मैं आपको देता हूँ कि यार ये 100 रुपये लें और मुझे साल बाद या 2 साल बाद या जब दिल करे वापस कर दें. अच्छा, उसमें बिल्ट इन ये है ही नहीं है इस कॉन्ट्रैक्ट के अंदर कि गवर्नमेंट जो है वो लिटरली इन अ वे टैक्स करती है, पैसे प्रिंट कर वो पूरी कौम को टैक्स कर देती है, राइट. वो कहते हैं ना, हम कहते हैं कि गवर्नमेंट टैक्स नहीं इकट्ठा करती, तो भाई वो प्रिंट करके आपको टैक्स ही कर रही है बिकॉज वो आपके जो संदूक में पैसे हैं उसकी वैल्यू कम कर देती है और गवर्नमेंट उस पैसे को बोरो कर लेती है. सो इन अ वे इट्स जस्ट सेइंग ब्लैक एंड वाइट इन द वे दैट वी अंडरस्टैंड कि यार मैंने 100 रुपया दिया और वो 100 रुपया आप मुझे 5 साल बाद वापस कर दें, doesn't work because that the value is reduced. You become the beneficiary of that value in that Islamic system. मैं तो बस जाके लोगों से पैसे इकट्ठे करता रहूँ और मैं उस पैसे से जाके सोना भी खरीद लूँ तो मैं 5 साल बाद जाके वापस करूँगा, मैं अपने कट रखूँगा और मैं उस बेचारे को जो है वो कम चीज़ वापस कर दूँगा. तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल हाउ डू यू reconcile with that?
दिस इज़ अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक जिस पे बहुत कुछ मैंने लिखा भी है और बहुत कुछ लिखा भी जा सकता है. बट बेसिकली यहाँ पे और एक्चुअली ऑल ओवर द प्लेस, economic theory as it is taught in universities all around the world is basically a propaganda instrument for capitalism, which basically makes it impossible to understand how the economy works and how, especially how money works and how interest works. And what's really happening is very, very different from what appears to be happening. So ये इकोनॉमिस्ट कहते हैं ऑल ओवर के इन्फ्लेशन इज़ कॉज्ड बाय एक्सेस मनी. तो मनी प्रिंटिंग होती है तो फिर उससे इट हैज़ नथिंग टू डू विद इन्फ्लेशन. इन्फ्लेशन इज़ एक्चुअली कॉज्ड बाय प्राइस इंक्रीजेस. प्राइस इंक्रीज कौन करता है? द पीपल हु आर प्रोड्यूसिंग. So why do they increase the prices? They increase the prices to make bigger profits. But also there's another thing. The real wage that they are paying to their laborers goes down. And this is a way for them to extract and exploit laborers and to increase their profits. Over the past basically 20 or 30 years in the US, you can see that the productivity of labor has increased hugely, but the share of wages that the labor has remained flat, and the corporate profits have increased hugely. So, and the prices that they have charged is basically reduces the real wage of labor and increases their profits, and that's the source of inflation. It has nothing to do with money. So, magar because economists only think about money, because Friedman ने कह दिया था कि इन्फ्लेशन इज़ सोली ड्यू टू मनी, देयर इज़ नो अदर कॉज. तो वहीं उससे बाहर देखते ही नहीं हो. तो इट्स एक्चुअली इन्फ्लेशन इज़ ड्यू टू क्लास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट एंड इट्स अ कंसील्ड वेपन. और द नेचर ऑफ मनी इज़ वेरी डिफरेंट फ्रॉम व्हाट इज़ टॉट अबाउट इन कैपिटलिस्ट टेक्स्ट बुक्स. अब एक थ्योरी है completely secular, nothing to do with Islam, but it's very closely convergent with Islam. It's called modern monetary theory. It describes actually the correct nature of modern money. Modern money came into existence in 1971 when Nixon delinked dollars from gold.
Right.
तो फिर then all country currencies became floating. अब floating currency की जो theory है, it's very different from gold backed theory. तो इस वक्त जो है वो economic text books में जो theory है, it's all about as if currency is gold. तो all of the theory is assuming कि मसलन गवर्नमेंट के डेफिसिट जो है उसको कंट्रोल करो वगैरह वगैरह. ऑल ऑफ दिस हैज़ नथिंग टू डू विद रियलिटी व्हेन यू आर लिविंग इन अ फिएट करेंसी वर्ल्ड. सो ऑल ऑफ द recommendations being made by economists are just blind. तो ये modern monetary theory is very interesting because it says कि we should have zero interest rates, we should have zero inflation. It tells you how you can do that. But these are very different from anything found in capitalist textbooks, because that's another lecture. It requires a lot of...
So if I were to connect this to cryptocurrencies, right? Not in the... So देखें cryptocurrencies का ना up until the bust, अभी recently एक उसका bust cycle आया. उससे पहले मुझसे जब पूछा था मैं लोगों को कह रहा था it's a Ponzi scheme, it's a pump and dump scheme, and in which by and large it was for a lot of people. But let's talk about the fundamentals. The fundamentals are that it is a secure, democratized, finite form of currency of sorts. That is essentially where you can't just print or take off the market. It's a limited amount. और वो ट्रांजैक्शन में यूज़ होती है. सो फॉर एग्जांपल मैंने एक काम किया और उस काम के एवज मुझे 1 पाक कॉइन मिल गया, राइट? अब जब वो लिमिटेड सप्लाई में ना, एंड एज प्रोडक्टिविटी इंक्रीजेस, तो मेरा उस कॉइन की वैल्यू ओवरऑल इंक्रीज करेगी एज पीपल बिकम मोर वेल्थी. एंड सो आई डोंट हैव द इनहेरेंट इंसेंटिव टू जस्ट कंज्यूम फॉर द सेक ऑफ कंजम्पशन. मैं तब कंज्यूम करूँगा बिकॉज एवरी टाइम आई कंज्यूम एक्चुअली मैं फ्यूचर वैल्यू से कम में, आज जब मैं कंज्यूम कर रहा हूँ तो मैं उसकी फ्यूचर वैल्यू ज़्यादा एक्सट्रैक्ट कर सकता हूँ पोटेंशियल.
सही है,
राइट? एंड सो आई एम नॉट रियली इंसेंटिवाइज, बट आई विल देन कंज्यूम व्हेन इफ रिक्वायर्ड, राइट? एंड सो देयरफॉर आई फील लाइक कि पुराने वक्त में क्या था, आपके पास गोल्ड था, गोल्ड को आपने ट्रांजैक्ट करना मुश्किल हो रहा था, तो आपने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स बना दिए और आपने उसको लिंक कर दिया. आपने कहा ये कॉन्ट्रैक्ट से लिंक. फिर आपने चूँकि कॉन्ट्रैक्ट इतने ज़्यादा फ्लोट कर दिए तो आपने कहा कि यार अच्छा मैं उसको डीलिंग कर रहा हूँ. एंड दैट्स वेयर यू हैव दिस ब्रीफ पीरियड इन द हिस्ट्री, यू हैव दिस ब्रीफ पीरियड जिसमें आपने उसको डीलिंग करके देन यू स्टार्टेड गोइंग क्वैकरी ऑफ द हाईएस्ट ऑर्डर एंड यू आर एबल टू जस्ट put words and words and words on top of that. The masses didn't understand anything, and you created this entire system which I feel like is about to collapse.
Fractional reserve, huh?
And therefore you require now another system on top of that which is efficient, where the transactions can happen quickly. You have those contracts happening real time ke upar, but is also finite inherently as a built-in structure similar to gold. व्हेन दैट हैपन्स तो अगेन आपकी जो कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन है, जो आपकी कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ वो है, वो सब ख़त्म हो जाता है. बिकॉज मैं आपको एक पाक कॉइन देता हूँ, आप मुझे 2 साल बाद वापस करें, आप मुझे 5 साल बाद वापस करें, मैंने आपको अपनी एफर्ट के एवज जो है ना एक चीज़ दी है, वो आप 5 साल बाद वापस करेंगे तो दुनिया जिस तरफ खड़ी होगी उस हिसाब से मुझे उतनी वैल्यू वापस मिल जाएगी, राइट? And so the conversations that we constantly have today are driven by fiat, which will by and large be reduced as soon as you have this sort of a digitized, democratized currency, which is inherently finite. How do you see that?
दो बातें हैं यहाँ पे बहुत अहम, जो कि whenever you talk about money, then you have to ask who is authorized to create the money. क्योंकि these are the people who are getting something for nothing. तो मसलन जो हमारी फियाट करेंसी है, the governments are authorized to create, मगर उनके हाथ बांध दिए जाते हैं, and for good reasons, in the sense के if the government creates money irresponsibly, they can wreck the economy. And if they create it responsibly, they can make the economy great. This is what MMT is about, how to ensure that the government creates money which is useful for the economy, and basically there's only one requirement, that the government creates money to provide jobs and productive jobs, not steel mill jobs which are just you get money and you don't have to do any work. If the government prints money to provide productive jobs to all the people, this is something which it can do without any risk of inflation, and this is the best thing to do. So creation of money is the one thing. The second thing is, how do you ensure that the value of money remains stable across time? ये दोनों questions हैं, these are very important. If you, for example, tie the value of money to 1 hour of labor, then you have basically made it very inflation proof, because there are ways to do that, to make sure that the value of money is tied. Now Bitcoin may we have two problems. Who gets to create the money? Well, those people who have good computers and computer skills. So for us, in the Islamic world, crypto is not good, because these skills are in Russia and in some other places, and are not very widespread in the Islamic world. We would do better with the oil-based currency, because we have more of it. And we would do better with the labor-based currency. We can create those. And why should we stick to crypto? वो रशिया वाले ने बनाई है, और it's helpful to them. So creation of money. The other thing is कि crypto के सबसे बड़ा defect यही है कि there is no anchor which ties the currency of money stably to some fixed amount. ये जो तुम कह रहे थे कि the value is increasing, this is just the value depends on consensus. So if consensus changes, today everybody thinks कि अच्छा there's a scam. In fact, ये जो Silicon Valley Bank scandal है, and all of this has to do with crypto. अब इसमें is very interesting कि crypto वाले कह रहे हैं कि ये government ने ख़ास तौर पे interfere करके crash करवा दिया है crypto, और इसकी वजह से ये problem हुआ है, और government वाले कह रहे हैं कि ये crypto inherently unstable है, और इसकी वजह से we should. So they both have their own storylines as to what happened.
But that's what I'm saying. Forget about what's happening right now, right? There's a lot happening, and right now it's a lot of politics involved. What is gold? What was gold originally pegged to? Was it 1 hour of labor? Was it this or that? It wasn't.
Gold
it was a finite asset.
Gold was pegged to gold. Gold itself is intrinsically valuable.
Exactly. So मैं एक thought experiment कर रहा हूँ. मैं कह रहा हूँ कि एक currency है, और ये आपके ऊपर है कि आप उसको प्रूफ ऑफ स्टेक बनाएं, आप किस तरह बनाएं, आप उसकी जो है ना वो डेवलपमेंट किस तरीके से करेंगे. यार आप ये करोगे तो उसके ऊपर आपको जो है ना वो एसेंशियली वो मिल रहा है, नई करेंसी क्रिएट हो रही है. बट मैं कहता हूँ कि वो करेंसी बाय एंड लार्ज क्रिएट हो चुकी है, और वो जो है वो उसका कोई डेमोक्रेटाइज्ड मेथड है ऑफ रनिंग दैट करेंसी, एंड यू गेट सम टू रन दैट करेंसी, यू गेट सम स्टेक आउट ऑफ इट, एंड इट इज़ फाइनाइट एट द एंड ऑफ द डे, राइट? सो इट्स it's driven by कि कौन कितनी प्रोडक्टिविटी कर रहा है, वो कितनी किस वक्त उठा सकता है. सेम एज गोल्ड, you can't just गोल्ड मे बी जब गोल्ड को गोल्ड के तौर पे यूज़ करते तो साउथ अमेरिका में शायद बहुत गोल्ड पड़ा हुआ था, एंड they had the opportunity to be able to utilize that gold. But at the end of the day, the philosophy of what gold was and what a potential digital currency is very similar and therefore building an economy on top of that is also fairly similar to how the economics was at the time. वो तो हमने जब उसके ऊपर जाके हमने गोल्ड को साइड पे किया और हमने उसके ऊपर एक fiat based facade create किया, that's when things started going a little haywire. उस context में मैं आपसे कह रहा हूँ कि
actually there are some things that need to be clarified here. First of all, gold was not very widely used, gold currency, contrary to common belief. यानी world level पे gold trading system late 19th century में राइज हुआ.
Right.
Okay, basically the reason that it failed and the reason it will always fail is because in any growing economy you need to grow the money supply at roughly the same pace. Gold चूँकि artificial है and ये idea कि fixed money supply cannot keep up with the needs of a growing economy. And imbalances, basically the reason that this fractional reserve banking was invented was not because somebody was doing fraud, but because you need to continuously pour money into the economy to keep it running. Because as the economy expands, it needs more money. If you don't put in enough money, it leads to a recession, it chokes the economy. So that's why gold is not suitable as an economy, and no fixed currency. Currency must change with the economy in order for smooth functioning of the economy. So that means that in every year there must be money creation. If you are going to be, money creation should keep up with the extra economy growth. तो ये money creation किसके हाथ में होगा? This is the crucial question which drives the value of a currency. So if the money creation is in the hands of random parties who have no particular interest in, that's why it's better to have central banks control money, and that was one of their targets, to increase money stock at exactly the same pace as the growth of the economy. And that's a relatively sensible system, provided some checks and balances are put in place which are not there.
One last question on this. Do you think CBDCs are potentially an answer to जो central bank digital currencies अब आना शुरू हो गई हैं, digital dollar and digital?
हाँ, this is a potential answer. हाँ.
Right. चलें. Sir, thank you, for that very, very insightful session. And I know there are a lot of threads in it that people would find interesting, and I would love to have you again, maybe for a more detailed conversation on that particular thread. There's a question that I ask generally all of my guests, and I would love your answer on that as well. You've lived for quite a long while in the US, Belgium में भी आप दरमियान में रहे, टर्की में आप बड़ा सा रहे. I'm sure आप आगे पीछे आपने travel भी किया होगा, दुनिया आपने काफ़ी extensively देखी. More than that, actually, you've studied a lot of the civilizational level changes that have happened in our history, and उससे आपको बड़ा एक context मिलता है. A lot of times when we think about our world, we're very stuck in the present. And more often than not, the world sort of, मेरे experience में pendulums में घूमता है, right? So आप अगर उसको revert back करें तो वो काफ़ी हद तक जो है ना आपको नज़र आना शुरू हो जाता है कि यार डेटा एक तरफ जा रहा है. ठीक है, वो एक इंडिविजुअल और एक पॉलिटिशियन और एक ये मीडिया वाला बंदा ये बातें बोल रहा है, बट एवोल्यूशन जो होती है ना वो कलेक्टिव होती है, और वो उसके अंदर वो थिंग्स देन बिगिन टू कन्वर्ज इन सर्टन वेज. एंड एज वी आर नाउ बिगिनिंग टू सी कि वो ईस्ट वाज वेरी पावरफुल एंड देन फिर वो वेस्ट पे गया, बट इन इट्स इवेंचुअलिटी है वो वापस ईस्ट की तरफ आना शुरू हो गया. और उसको मद्देनज़र रखते हुए यू चूज़ टू कम बैक टू पाकिस्तान. ज़ाहिर है कोई बिलीफ होगा, कोई अंडरस्टैंडिंग होगी. आजकल बड़ा एक टर्बुलेंट टाइम है और हालात अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो है वो बड़े डीमोटिवेटिंग से हैं. हाउ डू यू सी पाकिस्तान 27 years from now in 2050, knowing what you know now, seeing what you've seen all throughout your life? And इसके अंदर अगर मैं, if I can add one very small thing, because a lot of guests tend to say कि if this happens then this will happen. I want to ask, irrespective of what happens, how do you see Pakistan? एक बेस लाइन क्या है जो कि आप देखते हैं कि यार ये इस तरह से तो कन्वर्ज करेगा ही?
You see, my answer to this question is कि अल्लाह ताला ने कुरान में लिखा है कि if you save a life, it is as if you have saved all of humanity. This is not an exaggeration. All of us have the power to change the world. So what the future will be is in my hands and in your hands. It will depend on what we do. This is a challenge for us. So it can be the best and it can be the worst. Allah Ta'ala ने हमें greatest potential दिया है, और वर्स्ट पोटेंशियल दिया है. व्हाट इट विल डिपेंड इज़ ऑन इज़ लैसा लिल इंसान इल्ला मा सआ. तो इस वक्त जो यानी व्हाट वी स्ट्राइव फॉर इज़ व्हाट वी विल गेट. तो इस वक्त जो मैंने देखा है कि स्टूडेंट्स में दे जस्ट वांट टू रन देयर किचन. यानी तो ये जिसके पास यानी ऐसी मंडेन सी डिज़ायर होगी तो वो मंडेन रिजल्ट्स लेके आएगा. तो मेरी कोशिश हमेशा ये रहती है अपने स्टूडेंट्स में, स्पेंड अ लाइफ टाइम एज अ टीचर, टू गेट माई स्टूडेंट्स टू एम फॉर द वर्ल्ड, टू एम टू चेंज द वर्ल्ड. तो इफ़ आवर गोल्स आर हाई देन वी विल अचीव हाई रिजल्ट्स. तो इकबाल ने कहा है कि अल्लामा इकबाल ने कहा है कि तू ही नादा चंद कलियों पर क़नाअत कर गया वरना गुलशन में इलाज तंगी दामा भी था. तो द गार्डन ऑफ अल्लाह इज़ ह्यूज ट्रेजर्स. हम छोटी सी चीज़ मांगेंगे अल्लाह ताला से हमें छोटी सी चीज़ मिलेगी, वरना अल्लाह ताला हमें जो कुछ हम मांगे दे सकते हैं. वी वांट वर्ल्ड लीडरशिप वी कैन हैव इट. इट वाज गिवन टू द अर्ली मुस्लिम्स हु वर इग्नोरेंट बेदुइन्स एंड very backwards and the most backwards on the planet. So today again the future is in our hands. We will make of it what we do.
And let's see, let's hope कि
Yes.
inshallah we're able to make something good out of it. I hope कि हमारे नौजवान जो हैं वो आपकी generation को we make you proud. But thank you so much for coming in and sharing all that insight, and I would absolutely love for you to come in again and have more detailed conversations on some of those topics, because I feel like कि हमने unfortunately we argue day in day out on the surface of such stupidity when actual में हमें थोड़ा सा ज़रा step back करना पड़ेगा और अपनी knowledge में पहले इजाफा करना पड़ेगा before everybody has an opinion these days.
Yes, that's
Right? And before that opinion, I think that knowledge is incredibly important to even begin to imagine. I think, to be very honest, the opinion in itself is fairly an egoistical thing a man can have, और जो कि वैसे ही inherently opposed है हमारे religion. I think personally, I think ego is the biggest thing that leads to failure. Right?
Absolutely.
So knowledge can do incredible things. So would love to have that. Thank you so much, sir, for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
एंड फॉर ऑल ऑफ यू गाइस, थैंक यू सो मच फॉर वाचिंग. अगर आपको एपिसोड पसंद आई अपने दोस्तों यार के साथ जरूर शेयर करिएगा. मुझे नीचे एक कमेंट सेक्शन में बताएं, हमने बहुत सारी इंटरेस्टिंग बातें की हैं इसके अंदर. सो आई एम श्योर कि बहुत सारे ओपिनियंस भी ड्रॉ हुए होंगे. मेरी लास्ट बात को मद्देनज़र रखते हुए मुझे ज़रूर बताइएगा कि व्हाट डू यू थिंक is the right way for Pakistan to move forward in this economic crisis? What are your thoughts on cryptocurrencies? What are your thoughts on Islamic economic system? How do you see the East and West divide, the changing world order, as Ray Dalio puts it? And how do you see the future of Asia, particularly as the world and the financial capital or the financial center of gravity of the world begins to move back towards the east? Would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. YouTube वाले लाइक का बटन दबाएंगे, एंगेजमेंट बढ़ेगी, ज़्यादा लोगों तक कन्वर्सेशन पहुंचेगी. ऑडियो प्लेटफॉर्म वाले सब्सक्राइब का बटन दबाएंगे, आने वाले एपिसोड्स की आपको नोटिफिकेशन मिलेगी. यहाँ पर कहीं पर इजी पैसा जायज़ का सादा प्यार होगा. इफ़ यूड लाइक टू सपोर्ट द चैनल, वी एक्सेप्ट एनीथिंग फ्रॉम ₹1 to as much as you'd like. It's the thought that counts. इसी के साथ साथ आई नो कि मैंने पहले अनाउंसमेंट की थी ऑन द कम्युनिटी ऑफ लीडर्स दैट we're creating, but like I mentioned earlier कि because it is going to be a paid community, I want to make sure कि जब भी हम उसको लॉन्च करें तो उसके अंदर वैल्यू जो है वो प्रॉपर मिले, and we under commit and over deliver, and that is why there are certain delays, but it is coming very very quickly, and we're just finalizing that structure for us to be able to give it to you. But anyways, this was Sayyid Muzamil Hasan Zaidi. You were watching Thought Behind Things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.